Welcome to the debate. Our material today, it really gets into the weeds of learning a second language, and specifically, it zeroes in on the learner's internal world. We're looking at a script that's designed to help people dismantle these, really intense psychological barriers. The fear of making a mistake, the fear of judgment, all of that.
Right. And it tries to solve this by giving you these strategies to restructure your thoughts and find what it calls safety. And that immediately brings up our central question for today.
Exactly. Is fluency mainly about this kind of psychological reframing, tackling those internal fears head on? Or is all of that just sort of the warm-up for the real work, which is systematic, behavioral training, and exposure?
And that's where we differ. I'm going to argue that while that psychological work is a useful starting point, it's the sustained behavioral training, the actual doing, that fundamentally drives fluency.
And I'll be arguing that no, that internal reframing is the central solution. You have to unlock the mind before the voice can even begin to work.
Okay, so let's hear your case.
Well, the material, I think, makes a compelling case by diagnosing the root problem as cognitive distortion. It's not about a lack of grammar knowledge. So the script immediately tries to create this secure internal space saying, this is a safe moment. It gets that if you can just manage the fear, the learning process can actually start. It explicitly reframes mistakes, saying, falling is not failure, it is learning.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires this pretty profound psychological shift. The learner has to consciously believe that they're still understood and still safe even when they get something wrong. But I think the most powerful part is how it redefines confidence. It calls confidence a result, not some feeling you have to conjure up first. And that gives the learner permission, really the permission to speak imperfectly. And this isn't just a minor tweak, it's a full-on identity shift from being a passive learner to being a speaker in progress. That's what creates the stability you need to keep going.
Okay, I see the argument, and that's a good outline of the cognitive side of it. But I do worry that this emphasis on comfort and internal states, it kind of misses the point that fluency is a performance skill. It's tied to real effort and application.
Well, I wouldn't call it comfort. The material's strongest analogies are, I think, behavioral. Take the central metaphor. A muscle is not weak because it is broken. A muscle is weak because it is unused. That framework demands training. If your linguistic muscle is weak from unuse, the only solution is high-volume use. It's a behavioral thing. The script even admits this training feels uncomfortable at first. And then there's the whole issue of translation. The solution it gives is also behavioral. Thinking in English is not talent, it is training. This points directly to needing massive input, massive exposure, until the words just come automatically. Fluency is achieved through repetition, not perfection. That effort, that repetition, that's the real engine here. The psychological stuff just clears the initial junk off the tracks.
Okay, so let's get into that tension then. Yeah, so if we accept the muscle analogy, that training has to be strenuous and uncomfortable, how can the material also make grounding and safety its absolute starting point? Doesn't fluency require you to embrace the discomfort? As the material even says, sounding silly today is the price of sounding confident tomorrow. So if your goal is muscle training, you have to push past comfort. Is it possible the focus on psychological safety actually holds people back?
See, I have to push back on that premise. Safety in this context, it's not the absence of effort, it's the absence of paralysis. The goal isn't to make the whole journey feel comfortable, it's to stop the learner from freezing up before they even take the first step. The material is tackling a very specific cognitive bias where the brain it exaggerates the threat of judgment, it catastrophizes.
The fear of being judged.
Exactly, and this paralysis is a real physical thing. It's that moment where you can't get the words out, your chest tightens up, you switch back to your native language. Creating a safe moment is the necessary precondition that allows a learner to even tolerate the discomfort of the repetition that you're talking about. The fear is the stopper. So without that psychological release valve, the behavioral training it can't start, or at least it can't be sustained.
Okay, your point about paralysis being the main inhibitor is well taken. But doesn't that create another problem? If a learner needs an internal safe space just to practice, Are they really building the resilience they need for messy, real-world communication? I mean, think about exposure therapy. To get over a phobia, you don't just talk yourself out of it in a safe room. Relief comes from repeatedly confronting the scary thing and seeing you survive. The mind learns from action. If the reframing is the main engine, it risks becoming a crutch that fails the second you step outside.
I'd frame it a bit differently. The psychological work isn't an avoidance mechanism. It's about building a new, productive internal narrative that lets you tolerate that confrontation. And to get more specific on the efficacy here, the material offers concrete techniques. Like it asks, how long do you remember other people's mistakes? 2 seconds? 5 seconds? This directly attacks the cognitive distortion, the exaggeration of how much people are scrutinizing you. And that realization, it provides immediate, actionable relief because it grounds the irrational fear in reality. I'm just not convinced that a cognitive light bulb moment like that really translates into fluency. Sure, it might offer some temporary relief, but the real task is so much deeper. You have to convert this ingrained habit of mentally translating everything into an automatic response. And that's neurological restructuring. That requires massive, high-frequency training. Removing one psychological barrier doesn't build the actual linguistic pathway. Training does. So, using a mountain climbing analogy, the psychological reframing lets me put on my boots, sure, but only the relentless, systematic climbing builds the muscle and stamina I need to get to the top. The training, the grit, that's what makes the difference long after the initial excitement of an identity shift wears off.
But the difference lies in the feedback loop. When a learner is trapped in that distortion, every single mistake reinforces the narrative. I'm bad at this. I should stop. It means any practice they do is actually counterproductive. The psychological reframing, that identity shift, it breaks that entire loop. It gives them the internal tool to see mistakes, not as failure, but as data. And if the input is categorized correctly as data, the training you're demanding becomes exponentially more efficient.
It's not just temporary relief. It fundamentally changes the quality of the behavioral work that follows. Which brings us back to what the material itself says. Confidence is a result. If we accept that, then the mechanisms that produce that result have to be the primary focus. And those mechanisms are behavioral. Repetition, exposure, speaking a little more each day until it gets easier. So the focus has to be on the consistent, measurable application of effort, not the initial feeling state. You're suggesting this internal permission is a strong enough lever, but, does one realization about your identity really generate enough motivation to get through the months of plateaus and frustration that come with learning a skill?
I think you might be underestimating the power of that initial permission, especially through the lens of self-efficacy theory. It's not about feeling confident.
It's about cultivating the belief that you can do what's necessary to get the result. The instruction is very clear. You speak, and then confidence follows. Giving yourself permission to speak imperfectly is the act that establishes that self-efficacy. It changes the whole experience from a high-stakes examination into a low-stakes exploration. And without that non-behavioral decision, the learner either avoids the behavior completely or they do it under so much stress that the negative feeling just kills any chance of sustained training. The psychological piece makes the behavior sustainable.
But sustained behavior is what recodes the brain. We see this in the difference between knowing grammar rules and actually being able to use them automatically. The psychological shift might help you learn the rules, but procedural fluency, speaking without thinking, is purely a product of procedural practice. If the psychological scaffolding encourages comfort over the necessary struggle, it can even become counterproductive. Functional fluency is achieved by pushing yourself into high-stakes scenarios that force those automatic pathways to fire. The identity shift is useful for the first 10 conversations, maybe. But the 1,000th conversation, the one that truly builds fluency, that relies almost entirely on the muscle you built from sustained, uncomfortable practice.
I just don't agree that it encourages comfort over discomfort. It encourages action despite the discomfort. The whole point of the psychological framework is to shut down that internal critic that demands perfection. That's what allows the learner to tolerate the awkwardness of training. The reframing gives them the internal logic to rationalize why it's okay to sound silly, so they can get back to the repetition day after day. It's the bridge that connects their intention to long-term, often painful action.
Okay, so time to wrap up.
Right.
So to summarize my perspective, the psychological framework, establishing safety, giving yourself permission to be imperfect, embracing that identity of a speaker in progress, all of that is the essential catalyst. Without getting over those cognitive blocks that blow fear out of proportion, the uncomfortable training you need to build the muscle just can't even begin. The brain has to agree the effort isn't the threat before you can even start.
That's a compelling argument for it being a necessary first step. But, the material's most powerful analogies, the untrained muscle, the idea that fluency comes from repetition, defining thinking in English as training, they all point to a solution that is overwhelmingly behavioral.
The reframing provides the motivation. It gives the green light. But the systematic, consistent, and yes, often uncomfortable work of training is what actually yields the result of confidence and fluency. So it seems we agree on the components, but we disagree on the hierarchy, on what the primary barrier to overcome really is. Is it cognitive or is it procedural?
Exactly. The material suggests this deep, complex intertwining of internal permission and external effort, which forces us to see language learning not just as an educational problem, but as a deep psychological one too.
And I think understanding that relationship, where internal safety supports the necessary external struggle, it really illuminates just how complex that journey from fear to excitement truly is, and there's certainly more to explore in the material about how you maintain that shift long term.